Hello. This is Derek from One Over Tea. Welcome back to another episode of Tea Soup, a podcast all about tea culture, life in modern China, and Chinese tea. I'm your host, Derek Poskin. I've been living in China since 2016, and I've been drinking, buying, and selling Chinese tea for the past decade. So, pop on that kettle, heat up your teaware, and let's get this session started. Alright, so welcome back to another episode of Tea Soup. This is the first episode in the Year of the Dragon. That's right, it's currently Spring Festival. Right now, all of the small shops are closed. It's the second day of Spring Fest. The restaurants, the small mom and pop shops, they're all closed. Everyone's back home. The gates are down locked, and the streets are kind of silent in a lot of the parts of the cities. And then in other parts, it's really, really busy. In the old town, it's super busy. In the shopping malls, it's super busy. But in like the old residential areas, there's just nobody about. It's a really interesting time. Spring Festival is all about going back home, seeing your family, playing cards, mahjong, drinking, eating, and then doing a little bit of travel in the next couple days or so. I think I've mentioned on this podcast a few other Chinese festivals like the Guoqing Festival. That's the National Independence Week. That's the week-long festival where they give everybody in China like a week off. They're doing the same thing right now. Usually in Springfest, I think it's a little longer this year. They give everyone a few extra days. Part of that, trying to get people to have more kids, if you know what I mean. Give them a little more time off out of the office and stuff. So right now, I think we'll have another week or so where people are traveling, enjoying themselves, and then usually there's the Lantern Festival, which happens the 15th day of the new year. So right now it's the second or third day. Usually people go back to work around the 7th or the 8th. They might have extended it, and the 15th is truly the end of the Spring Festival. So right now we're kind of in an in-between phase where I can't really do a whole lot of work. I can take photos, drink tea. We're working on this heicha box, this Anhua heicha that we'll probably release here pretty soon. So I actually do have quite a bit of work I need to be doing right now, but it's a very holiday kind of season. So I've been spending time with my tea master. I've been catching up on some movies. I've been sleeping a lot. It's been really good. Anyways, I've also been catching up on this Tea Soup episodes because there are a few more I want to do before the tea season starts in spring, because I'll be taking again all of April off, just traveling all around. I'll hit Suzhou again for the Bilochun. I'll hit Hangzhou for the Dragon Well. I'll go right down to Yunnan, spend a few weeks there, and then maybe get out to Sichuan because there's some good jasmine tea from one of Alex's professor's friends has a farm up there. Then we have the Hefeng. Hefeng is our own little plot of land out in Hubei, and we're working with the Loshui Yuan Cooperative. We've actually created a Chinese cooperative with them now, and so it's the Loshui Tea Cooperative, and that has all the members of One River Tea, a few other people who have been helping us with the woofing over the years, and then also some of the members on the Mayan Tai Mountain that we've been working with for the past few years, and then of course Luo and his wife. And yeah, we have, I think, about 10 acres of tea fields there. We're going to start planting some of the new tea bushes. This is the Huangjin Ya, which we really like. This is the golden green varietal cultivar from Hunan. We're going to plant it here in Hubei. We'll plant that probably in the next couple weeks or so. And then Alex said that they found a patch of Dabai Hao, Fuding Dabai Hao cultivar that the villagers planted on the mountain back in the 80s. And no one's looked at it for the past 20 years just because it's so isolated in the patch of the mountains. And so Alex wants to get back out there and just see the status of those bushes. And so I'm really looking forward to getting out there sometime in April, later April, cutting a path to those those wild is what I wanted to say, wilded Fuding Dabai Hao cultivar back on the mountain in Hubei, and see if we can make a small batch of white tea from that. At that time, we'll have 2 woofers out there with us as well, so we'll have a little extra labor power to start picking some green tea, making some white tea, and then working with some of this traditional Shigan processed tea, which is the old traditional method of rolling the tea. I think if you follow us on Instagram, you've seen them rolling the tea with their feet. This is one of the old ways they used to do it. It's an old wooden bucket. Really interesting processes. Last year wasn't up to Alex's expectations or standards. And I think the solution here is to use a more tender spring pick. So we'll try that this year as well. And so really looking forward to that. I'll make some videos. And then there's one new tea that we're looking into. It could be a green tea. It's probably a green tea from Anhua. Could be the Taiping Hokui. Could be a Maofeng. Or could be the Xinyang Maojian, which I totally forgot about, but is one of the top 10 Chinese teas. It was known as like the king of green tea, and it's since just fallen out of public favor. So I think I do need to do a poll. This episode will have a lot of questions, so I won't do the poll here. I'll do it on Instagram. If you have one of these 3 teas that you're really interested, is it either the Huangshan Maofeng, the Taiping Hokui, or this Xinyang Maojian, you can drop us a line and let us know. Anyways, so that'll be the last trip in April, I think. And then I do need to go to Fuding to get some cakes, some white tea cakes pressed with Chiu. This episode, I'll actually be talking a whole lot about pressing teas. I actually spent a lot of time really excited talking about spring just because it's coming up. And Alex has a lot of information about the new cooperative that we've started, what we're planning. I think we're going to try and get 100 jin of green tea, which is like a 50 kg. And this is the tea that we want to make ourselves. We want to make ourselves. This will be the Maojian from Hefeng Maojian. Alex met with a big cooperative in Hangzhou, a Chinese cooperative that's really interested in this kind of like cooperative market alliance and stuff like that. And so they offered to help us market some of the teas, sell some of the teas. They wanted a big investment. Alex will talk more about it when we actually get the chance to sit down with him, hopefully sometime in spring. But there are a lot of cool things going on in Hefeng and Hubei, and kind of like the new style of the cooperative that is a little more domestic oriented, but it will have some international relevance because this is the cooperative that a lot of the woofers are coming to help us out with, because it's hands-on experience turning a tea garden into an organic tea garden, picking the tea, making the tea. And then also in the true cooperative structure, this is where people can start, having a part of this cooperative. I think one of our friends, Phelan, has already put in a lot of time and energy picking, weeding, helping us out here. And so he's a prospective member into this Chinese side domestic cooperative. But of course it could be international. Anyways, back to the episode at hand. Tea Soup episode 29, is it? Yeah, 29. This episode, I think I'm just going to talk about pressing the tea cakes, pressing the Xigui tea cakes, because that is right where we are chronologically in this story. And I just mentioned my goal to press the white tea cakes, and so that'll bring us into this episode. Now, in the last episodes, I talked about sourcing the Xigui and the Bangdong teas in a very quick succession. I think, chronologically speaking, we've only been in Linsong for about 36 hours. And here we are getting ready to get the Xigui tea cakes pressed. And so I'll just continue on right with that story. But first, just a real quick background. I've been living in China for about 7 years now. One River Tea, we've been doing this, me, Alex, and Xiaoyan, for the past 6 years. And for the longest time, we've always wanted to get tea cakes pressed. This has been a really big idea in our minds. We've always been looking out, asking different people. And of course, it's really, really popular in Yunnan with all of their teas, and less so in the rest of China, with the small exception of Fuding with their white teas. What held us back in Fuding is the amount of quantity, the minimum quantity they expect if you want to press teas. And so, while it's very easy to buy tea which has already been pressed, it's a lot more difficult to actually get it pressed yourself. And of course, buying tea cakes that have already been pressed is not really our impetus. Our motto for One River Tea has always been follow the leaf. right? From bush to brew, know everything about the leaves that we're selling, from the people picking them, the land they were grown on, the people processing them. And while this may seem very simple and straightforward, it is anything but. It's so difficult to follow the actual leaf from the garden to the actual finished tea. And really, there's so many places where you could lose sight of this, so many changing of hands it goes to the picker, the maker, the seller, etc. And I'll kind of give you a few little examples here in case you just an insight into the on the grounds view of this whole Chinese tea industry. Now, for the first example, we can go back to the white tea episodes. I think I mentioned the fresh leaf wholesale market in the Fuding area. And this is where processors come and put bids on huge amounts, kilograms upon kilograms of white tea that were grown somewhere in Fuding. And then these processors go buy the raw leaves from people who picked it, and then they blend them all together and process them into a single batch of tea pressed into cakes. And while the Fuding government's doing their best to make sure that all the tea being sold in this market does come from Fuding, and that all these teas are subject to the same pesticide fertilizer ban that's seen in the rest of the municipality, there's still a significant difference between where these teas were grown. If it was in Panxi, if it was in Guangyang, if it was in Bailing, Diantou, or Taimushan, there's a huge range of different tastes and terroir you could get from these gardens. Additionally, there's a huge significance between who's picking these teas, the care for the gardens, the quality of the gardens, if they really were up to code as far as the pesticides and chemicals uses go. And so there's so much that we really don't know about if you're buying these teas that were processed in these pin-paid lots and blended together. I mean, consider in that green tea episodes when we were buying the Mingqian Bilo Chun, it was raining all spring and we had to call the maker every day on a sunny day and be like, hey, can we buy this sunny day tea today? And they're like, okay, this has already been sold out. We can wait until tomorrow. And I'm like, okay, but I want to make sure tomorrow is sunny when you pick it. That way I can buy that lot that was picked in the sunlight. Because if you pick tea and make tea when it's raining or it's too wet, the tea will have this water taste and really won't taste very, very rich. And so if you're buying these lots of teas that have just been mixed together from God knows where, picked God knows when, you lose a lot of control over the final product. However, this is a very common practice in China. And of course, I'm talking right now about white tea and Fuding and the blending together and the pressing of cakes. But I have another example of a friend Xiao Shu, who comes from a long line of Dansong oolong producers in the Phoenix Mountains. Him and his family have a small little garden, about 30 mu, which is absolutely tiny. That's like just under 5 acres of tea. And they make a lot of mao cha, and then they sell the mao cha to other people that finish the tea. He was telling me the other year that he wants to sell 2 metric tons of mao cha, 2,000 pounds of loose tea. And I'm like, wow, you guys can make that much tea? He's like, no, we can't make that much. I'll just have to buy it from neighbors and then sell it. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. It's very ambitious of you. And then I was thinking, I was like, is the tea you're selling me your tea? Or is it your neighbor's tea? I have all of these videos of you guys picking it, processing it. I'm understanding your process. And now I'm not even certain if the tea you're selling me is the tea you're making. And like, we're good friends. You killed a chicken when I went up to your house and we ate it. Like, that's about as deep as it goes as far as like this camaraderie between tea farmers, like when they kill a chicken for you. And now I'm just like still uncertain, like, is that actually your tea or are you selling me your neighbor's tea? And so, yeah, ever since hearing that, I always have to double check with him to make sure that I'm buying the tea that came from his really beautiful tiny garden that's very agriculturally diverse and a really good care taken with it, picked by him and his mother and his father, made by them. And I'm just like, still have that little seed of doubt where I'm like, I'm not sure if this is actually yours or not. I mean, so the long story short, In my opinion, there's so many unknowns when you're buying tea in China. You can try your best to get the actual tea you're looking for directly from the garden, from the makers, from the land you've seen. But a lot of times when you're buying it that's already been pressed into a cake, there are so many unknowns. Unless you're buying it directly from the person who commissioned that cake to be pressed, if you're buying it from somebody who just bought the cake and is reselling the cake, there are so many unknowns in the actual origin of the leaf material. And again, you can have a great tea that's an unknown cake. That's not the issue here. The issue here is that as a tea vendor, as One River Tea, I want to take out the mystery. I want to know exactly what I am selling and exactly what I'm providing to the people buying my teas, right? And so we're really against the idea of buying and reselling cakes that we don't really know the origin of, cakes that we haven't pressed ourselves. And as I'm saying this, I realize there's actually one exception on the website, and this is the 2013 Shomei cake that we get from Cho. And one of the reasons that we didn't get it pressed is one that it's very old, right? If you follow the white tea episodes, you know that they didn't really start pressing white teas until 2007 at the earliest, and like 2012 is when it really started taking off. And so to be there when this tea was pressed, you would have to be in at the groundworks when they first started this boom of white tea production, which very few people were. And so we get this tea, about the oldest shomei that we feel comfortable selling, from Cho. And Cho is, a dedicated curator, collector, appraiser of white teas to such a degree that we trust him for sourcing this tea. And so far, we haven't been disappointed with it. But again, this comes back to that idea of trust. At some point in a lot of these Chinese tea sourcings, you have to rely on trust. And even as I'm saying this, there's another story that's coming up to my mind. Is it had nothing to do with trust, but there was still a kind of mess up in the tea pressing. It was the first tea cake we ever got pressed. It was the Lao Gushu tea. And when we first went down to Lao, when I first went up to Lao, down to Lao, and then up towards the border of Fengsali and the border of Xishuanbana and Yiwu, that Yiwu region, the original pressing of this tea was in the traditional bamboo, stuffed into bamboo tubes. I have a video of it on the Instagram, of course, and I'll try and make a YouTube at some point. But that was the initial, it was like cigar tube shapes of the tea. And we got this pressed. I brought a bunch back, and then we commissioned some more of it. They pressed it, shipped it to the border. It got held up at the border during the summer months, of course, when COVID was hitting. And by the time we got the tea, we realized that they hadn't dried it out enough, and it was totally molded. I think I told you about this story maybe once, and I ended up drying it out in the sun and drinking it, and it was cool. It had that accelerated aged feeling like Hong Kong storage, but it was really just detained at the border in plastic bags for a few months, and it doesn't really sound as nice as Hong Kong storage does it. So after that mishap, we decided, okay, no more of these bamboo pressed teas because we don't quite trust their drying processes. And so what if we get their maocha, ship it to Yunnan, and then get it pressed in a factory in Menghai? We're like, okay, that's a great idea, but I haven't been to Menghai looking for tea cake pressing connections. And so how do we do this? And we tried to look online in the Chinese internet, Baidu. If you have any experience using Baidu or the Chinese internet, you probably know how not user friendly it is. You can try and search for things very specifically, and it's all just advertisements to things that are tangentially related to you. It's not as nice as, some of the other search engines where if you're like, okay, like what kind of factories are in this area, it doesn't give you a list of them. So it took us a long time. I think we ended up finding through a live stream or something similar to that, like the Chinese Instagram version or TikTok version, Douyin, of a tea factory that can press our teas. And so we reached out to them, made contacts, they agreed to press it. And so I reached out to the Fawn brothers in Lao, in Fengsali, and I put in another order. And unfortunately, I made the order a little complicated. And let's see. I wanted him to send me 3 different types of tea, and send it to 3 different batches and send them all to Munghai to be processed in their factory and pressed in their factory. Now, for those of you who aren't anticipating where this story is going, let me reiterate a few points here. The Fawn brothers are 2 younger Laotian kids. They're the sons of the tea garden patriarch, and so they're like 18 and 24 years old. They've been making tea for most of their lives, and they're pretty good at it. But I'm putting them in charge of organizing the picking and making these teas. And also, the lingua franca here between us is Chinese. They don't speak any English. I don't speak any of the Laotian language. And so, to use a Chinese idiom, our communication here is the epitome of the 鸡同鸭讲, which means the chicken talking to the duck. And it's usually described for people that's like, oh, I only speak Cantonese and I only speak Mandarin, and they're trying to talk to each other and they just talk very close to each other. But it's the idea that you can't quite understand each other. You're talking without the other person understanding. And so in addition to this language barrier, I'm putting in a complicated order for gushu teas. I want the huangpian picked out of some. I want the other ones still left, a little more wild. And if you can put the huangpian in another bag, that would be really cool. I could press some huangpian cakes as well. Huangpian, if you don't know, are the older last season's leaves that were picked, and they're kind of have a less water content. And so when you're making the teas, they don't roll up properly. They don't look nicely like all the other tea leaves will. And so usually these are picked out, but they're usually pretty tasty. So I wanted to get a few of those separate so that I could press them as well. So anyways, I asked them to do all of this, and then they charged me way less than they should. And I tell them, I was like, hey, that's not the price that's, going across the border. You should let me pay you a little more. And this gets them really confused. And I'm just like, oh my God. And I'm like, I don't want more tea. I want to pay you more for the same amount of tea. And I think they end up sending me an extra box of tea as well. Now, by the time all of this tea gets to the factory, it's been a few months because it had to wait at the border and get through. We're still talking about COVID times here. Now comes the other side where we're talking to this Munghai tea factory that we've never visited. We don't know them. We're just told them, hey, you're going to get a lot of Laotian tea, a lot of Laotian tea, and there'll be gushu. You can press it, and we want 3 different cakes, all 200 grams. And so it happens that it gets there right around May, I think, and they're still a little busy, and so they kind of put it off, so we have to push them and remind them. Eventually they press everything and send it to us, and we get 2 types of tea. We get a bunch of the gushu tea, and then like 5 kilograms of this white tea. And then I'm just really, really confused because we should have 3 different types of gushu green tea, like raw pu'er. And so then I'm trying to talk to the factory, talk to the Laotian guys and Laotian guys, and they're just like, hey, like, I sent you some extra white tea as well. I'm like, yeah, I saw that. I was very confused by it. He's like, yeah, don't worry, you paid me too much. I was like, okay. And then I'm talking to the makers, people who press the cakes, and they're like, oh yeah, we just blended all the tea together. I thought that's what you wanted. And we're like, okay, at least we kind of know what happened. But at the same time, the story here is about working with people we don't know. It's about communication issues. It's about the tea that goes into the cake we still don't even know, even if we're trying our best to know. So, again, this is 2 cautionary tales about how difficult it is to really understand what's going on when you're pressing the teas. And I will not stop here. I have another story because those were the first 2 tea cakes we had pressed, the tea cigars and then these Laotian tea cakes. And around that same time, early March, I was trying to work with Zhang to get some white tea pressed. And so this is the second and third pressings. It's a 2020 Chaumet, a green Chaumet. And then in 2018, this is the really, really nice 2018 Chaumet that we already sold out. And I really love this vintage. Somebody went and bought all of it from Zhang. Anyways, we wanted to get it pressed. It was early March, kind of before tea season begins. And so I was like, now would be a really good time to buy this tea give him the labels, and get it all pressed. And John was like, great. He took my money, and then he waited until like late May to actually press them. I was so furious. I was messaging him like every day because I was like, "Is this spring tea release?" And I was like, he should have had all the tea because they were from previous years, but he was just so slow doing it that I was just like, ugh. Anyways, moral of the story: two traumatizing tea cake pressing experiences in my mind. And here I am getting ready to press the Xigui tea, and so I'm a little nervous about it. But long story short, the Xigui pressing experience was like a dream from heaven. Everything was smooth, fast, clean, exactly what I wanted, and even more. And so let's talk about that now. So let's pick up this story where we left off, right? So we have 5 kilograms of the coveted core region spring Xigui Chao Mu in the car from the Lee brothers, and we're on the ride back to Linsong. We're going to meet at Lanjie's tea house in the early morning to finalize the wrappers, print out the wrappers for the cakes. And then at the tea house, that's where I'm like, okay, I need to finalize these designs, see if they can print them off. And this is something I've always been very curious about, how people do and design their tea cakes. I mean, there's so much branding involved. What do you want to? What's representative of your brand? What's on point, on brand? What's captivating? What embodies the tea experience? What will actually market well and what will sell? And what do you want to put your name on, right? And so deciding this, I decide to really quickly. I have a few hours to do this, so I decided to play to my strengths. I'm not a really fine artist. I don't have that skill set or a really well versed in design, and so I pick a picture from each region that I took while I was there. As I mentioned before, I really love photography. I pride myself in my photos, and that has a really nice quality to it. And I tweaked some colors, edited them, so something in between like a photo and a design and stuff like that. But I realize it's precisely problems like this that really fulfill me, that really make me enjoy doing what I'm doing, running this tea company, creating all of these problems and then solving them. It's like when you own a small business, you own a little problem generator that never ceases to create problems that you really need to solve. And so every day, every decision, it's an attempt to solve a problem that you may or may not have anticipated. And while sometimes this can feel a little daunting or could be a nightmare to some people that really like solutions at hand, I tend to really enjoy the way it keeps me mentally on my toes. I'm always looking for new solutions, and the days are never the same, right? I can spend hours and hours and hours working on this tea company because I'm doing mental gymnastics. I'm doing a little bit of design work. I'm doing a little bit of artistry. I'm taking photos. I'm drinking tea. I'm writing these scripts and stuff like that. I can literally work for hours and hours and hours without any type of break because I'm doing so many different tasks, right? As a business, you have to learn literally to do every in and out of it. I mentioned earlier I'm not very good at design or very good at fine arts, but that's really something that I probably should start studying and get better at. That way, when I reach that problem next time, I'll have a solution handy. And so for me, this is really like the ideal kind of state of mind to be in. And the most incredibly not infuriating but amazing thing about this is every time you solve a problem, it creates a host of new problems. Like, for example, I need to press these cakes. Okay, I finally found somebody who will press my cakes for me. And then all of a sudden I get hit with this idea of like, oh, now you need to design a label for it. Now you have to decide what size you want to press. How many kilograms do you want to buy? How do you want to disperse that between the small minis and the bigger cakes? Do you want to do 200 grams, 50 grams, 100 grams? And that's not even getting into if you want to do blends. If you want to do blends, then you could do pure origin. You could do a little bit of Chaomu, the older trees. You could do all Gushu, a mix of Gushu and Chaomu. You could do a mix of different regions. And so as soon as I find out the answer to one problem, I have another whole list, a laundry list of problems, and I kind of, can solve them based on immediacy. So right now, I've decided 200-gram cakes, 7-gram minis, and then I need to design a wrapping label. But then I have to decide also, oh, is the mini going to be separate from the full cake? Should I have a stripped down version for the mini cake? Yes or no? What information do I put on the bag? Chinese or English? Do I want to do a QR code, a website link? All of this little tiny information, the minutia of deciding these things for the business. It's, for me, I love it because there's no book I can read for this stuff, right? I can't just Google it. I could probably ask ChatGTP. I wonder what they would say. But anyways, you have to solve the whole problem yourself. You have to create the problems you want to solve, and then you have to solve them. And for me, it's both exhilarating and rewarding to realize that all of the work that goes into starting something from nothing, it's all something I've accomplished. And, I've accomplished with my friends, with my members in the cooperative who have, helped bounce ideas off of and whatnot. But really, like, in order to grow a company, to develop a business, you have to constantly step out into that unknown, constantly find things that need to be solved. And you have this total change in your mindset. This is that growth mentality, which, as the great psychologist Abraham Maslow wrote, we either step forward into growth or backward into security. Security is that place where all the problems rest contained in their known solutions, and growth lies anywhere outside this bubble. And so really, to grow anything, you really have to get into this realm of, oh, I'm not actually sure about this. There's that level of frustration where you're not good at it, right? That's the fake it till you make it, where when you step out of that world and you're like, oh my God, I have no idea how to solve this. And then you have to start looking for solutions. And so the secret to having this growth begins when you learn to love that problem-solving experience, and you go out of your way to find these new experiences, to find these innovative things, to explore the impossibly miraculous thing that we collectively call life. I mean, that's what it's all about, right? And so to cherish this growth mindset, it's something both honed by running the business and has honed the business. It's this catch-22 of growth. It's really amazing. Anyways, let's bring you into this, dear listener. So now's the time to break that fourth wall and pose you a question. If you were in my position and you had, one morning to design a tea cake wrapper, what would you do? Now, there are a few things that go into this question. The first part, I already put a time limit on you, but we could kind of dispense with that on one side. If you had an unlimited amount of time, an unlimited amount of talent, ability, money was no obstacle, what would you press and what would the wrapper look like? Now, the second problem, a little more like my problem here, if you had to do this in one morning, what would your wrapper look like? What would you be able to do? Bear in mind that I'm working within the realm of copyright stuff, right? And so you can't just take images and put them on your tea cake. You have to have total rights to the images. And now I'll create a little Q&A portion for Spotify where you can answer this question. And if you're listening on YouTube, you can just drop a comment on what your ideal tea cake wrapper would be. Now, while I let this prompt ferment in your minds, let me muse a little bit about why pressed tea is so popular in the West. So, tea itself is a highly subjective beverage. This is, if you listen to that Drinking Dan Song episode, a source of my existential disquiet when I'm doing tasting notes, when I'm picking out good teas. Everyone has their own tastes. Everyone enjoys different things. It would be boring if we all like the same thing. And so when I'm drinking a tea and I'm like, this is a great tea, I know there are certain things that are objectively good about it, but the flavor and the experience and the taste, that's all subjective. And so what some people think is worth their money, for other people isn't. What some people really like are teas that I do not enjoy. And so when it comes to buying any type of food or beverage, your taste is what's the most important. It's not where it comes from. It's not if it was mixed. It's not if you know exactly the name of the farmer that made it. No, what's most important, does it taste good to you? And so this notion of what tastes good is very difficult when you're looking online at a product, right? If you're walking in the store and looking at all the bottles of beer, all the different types of wine, and you can't smell them, you can't taste them, what are you left with, right? Let's look at that for an example. So you want to find a wine. You have a few things to pick from: the color, the country, the region, the types of grapes. Maybe you know roughly what you want. You want a red Tempranillo from Spain. Okay. You go into the wine store and you see dozens of bottles that are all meet that criteria. And now which one are you going to select? Of course, you could look at a wine review app, you could ask the staff, you could do research about the winery, but really, what do most of us do? Maybe I'm projecting here, but what I do is I look at the bottle, I look at the label, and I make a decision what feels right to me. What am I attached to? What do I gravitate towards as far as this label looks, right? A huge amount of my decision making, especially with beers or wine, like if I'm looking for an IPA, how many IPAs are there, right? And so I go into a brewery and I see all their labeling for the different bottles of IPAs. The same brewery has a handful of different types of beers, and I'm like, well, I like the label and name for this one, right? Because if you strip it all down, we're just talking about brown bottles, we're just talking about aluminum cans, and then you put a name and a label on it, and that changes the entire game. I know this all sounds pretty obvious, but again, I'm making the claim for why really nice design packaged tea is different from a lot of the other types of tea. If you strip out all of the labels, let's talk about Dansong. Dansong, it all looks the same, right? With like white tea, maybe you could have different types of, different quality, different picking times, different picking seasons. With Dansong Oolong, it's all going to be dark roasted stripped tea. With a lot of Pu'er teas, it's all going to look very, very similar. And so how do you distinguish these? You do it the region, you do the mountain, the village. But if a blend, you're kind of at a loss there, right? So if it's a blend of all these different materials to create a really good tea that tastes great, how are you going to decide one from another? A lot of it comes down to the label, the design, the packaging, if you trust the vendor, if you like the taste of the vendor too. As I mentioned before, you kind of gravitate towards people you like their taste in teas. It's similar to music, right? So if you go into the music store and you see a bunch of vinyls, you see a bunch of CDs, cassette tapes, you can gravitate towards, I like this style, oh, I like this artist. I'm probably like anything this artist makes, but here are 3 different CDs with different arts on them, right? Here's 4 different vinyls, and they all have, a different pull-out poster, something like that. What I'm getting here is the tactile experience of it, where right now where a lot of music has been digitized, and we don't have that experience of having a physical copy of something. Tea is one of the last bastions of that in my mind, where if you look at a tea cake, it's almost very, very similar to a vinyl or something like that. The physicality of these commodities. It's really cool to bring that back with the idea of art and the way to sell art even, right? With the whole digitized everything. It's so interesting to kind of see how we can bring back some level of physicality to all of this. So what remains is the idea that the tea wrapper for the tea cake is just a canvas waiting to be filled by your own ideas. And so with all of these ideas now bubbling in your head, the design of wine bottles, the labels on craft beer cans, the posters found in vinyl albums, the CD sleeve art, what would your contribution be? What would your tea cake wrapper be? What would it look like? And again, 2 different questions here. One, you have one morning to do it and only what you can come up with. 2, you have an unlimited amount of time and resources. And so these are 2 very different questions. And of course, on the first one, I would like to challenge you to avoid the immediate gratification of using AI art. I mean, unless right now the AI generated art would be, you would use it as an artistic point to be like, oh, this is the paradigm of human development we're living through right now. That could be a cool use for AI art on the tea cake wrapper, but at the moment I would kind of like to put that against the rules, where it's like, sure, you could just type in a prompt of an idea you have into AI, but again, is that what you want your brand to be? Is that on brand, right? It would certainly be the easiest and quickest way to get a tea cake wrapper, but what does it really say about you and your morals? I mean, not morals to be too high and mighty here, but what does it say about what you believe in, what you like and appreciate, right? So last year, as I mentioned, when I had just a few hours to figure out these tea cake wrappers, I ended up using photos I had taken with edits to their color and shape. And this was a really cool, stopgap. I felt pretty proud of it because they were all images tied specifically to the teas I was selling. They all had my level of, composition as far as the photography goes. But for me, this is still kind of second best, right? Because to do it by myself, yes, I can have that feather in my hat, say, like, oh, I did everything by myself here. However, what's even better is to establish this sense of community and to work with other people within and without the tea community. And so this is something that I've done before that I really have appreciated every single time. And shout out to Ange from Gushu Studios. Shout out to Iris, who helped me design our label and some of the white tea cake wrappers, my friend Janice. And these have always been really, really wonderful, but it's not something you can get done in a morning. It's not something I'm really sensitive about working with artists and pushing them too hard for deadlines, right? And so I'm very relaxed about it. I usually give them ample amount of time to the point where some people have given me designs very, very quickly, and then I don't press the cake for, many months. Maybe Jong waits an extra 3 months when he should have pressed it right away. And so then the artist has been waiting for like half a year, and they're like, hey, are you ever going to use that art? And I was like, yeah, well, we'll get it to it. But another one I've collaborated with is my friend Gongar, who's an exceptionally talented Tuja minority artist who makes some of the most incredibly detailed and mythologically rich Tuja inspired artwork. And I love these kinds of collaborations because what you're doing is you're creating this sense of community, this sense of strength between people, these bonds. And again, it can be links all within the tea community, or even better, links outside of it. Like Gong Er wants to sell the tea cakes with her art on it in her studio in Zhangjiajie. And so that's another cool representation of, instead of just selling prints of your artwork, now you're selling tea that has your artwork printed on it, right? And so again, getting back to that physicality of art and design and labels and whatnot, here now we're bringing more people who were initially drawn into Tuja minority into tea culture, and then vice versa, ideally. And so let me just throw it out there right now. If you are listening to this and you are an artist or would like to have an idea to create a work of art for a tea cake, I'll be pressing a lot of tea cakes here in April and in May and June. And so if you have an idea, if you have a design or you're interested in doing any cake wrappers for us, send us an email with some samples of your work. Love to do collaborations. And this isn't an all for glory kind of thing. We'll definitely pay you for it and give you some of the tea for free. And so yeah, so this is just kind of my plug for that fourth level of luck. I mean, if you've been there for the different stages of luck, you know what I'm talking about. But this is that moment where I put it out into the world and see if the right people can find me. So again, huge thanks to everyone who we've worked with previously. Your artwork is amazing. You can see Ange's tea work on the Baimudan, the 2021 Baimudan from Zhang. You can see Iris's work on both the One River Tea label and in the 2018 Antiquity Shomei. And then you can see my friend Janice's work on the old 2018 Shomeis, which aren't really available anymore. And then Gong R is the one who did the Lin Song Forbidden Fruit tea cake, and that one is just beautiful. It has a really interesting folk tale that's pretty tragic, and I won't spoil the ending for it, but I put a QR code on the tea cake wrapper so you can scan that and read the translated version of the whole story. Anyways, getting back to designing this tea cake wrapper in the morning in Linsong in Lanjie's tea house, I get a few different design wrappers figured out for the different cakes I want to press. Right now I have 3 cakes. I have the Manfei, the Bangdong, and the Xigui. But today, since I only have the Xigui tea, that's the only cake we're going to press. And so we're only printing off these wrappers. And so we're talking to the people next door. Lanjie's tea house is kind of in one of the old tea cities in Linsang. And so the people next door are the people that that print all of her wrappers. And so it's just really, really convenient. We go over there and I get to talk to the people designing the wrappers on like the the Photoshop. And so I'm actually designing it. I sent it to them and then I double check to make sure that, the margins are accurate and stuff. And then I get to select the paper. And for me, as I mentioned that tactile experience, this is an incredible, great time for me because I go through all of the different paper and I'm thinking about the designs, how it's going to look when it's printed on it, how thick do I want it. I tell Lanche I want an inner wrapper, an outer wrapper, because I hate it when like the tea cake, it's broken up and it falls out of the wrapper. So I did the double wrap for these guys. I'm really excited for all of this. We get the little neife. The neife is the inner ticket printed out and then cut out into this really tiny thing. And this one, I have to admit, I just did the label, then I wrote the name of the tea. I gotta create a better neife for next year, but that's next year's problem, which I guess actually is this year's problem. Anyways, it's about 10 a.m., 10:30 when I actually finish the design. We get them all printed off, and now we're trying to get to the place where they're pressing the tea. Lange is moving very quick, and things are I'm kind of expecting it to move quickly because she said so, but she's kind of on a rush, and I'm trying to figure out why she's on a rush. And she says today's the last day before the festival, and I'm like, oh, what festival? It's like April 20th. And she's like, it's the water splashing festival. It's the Dai Minority New Year. Things will close down for at least 3 or 4 days. And I was like, oh, dang. So everything here in Linsang has happened in a period of 3 days. And now I'm looking at 3 or 4 days where I can't do anything at all. I can't press any tea. I'll have to just kind of wait here for 3 days out of my, very, very quick trip. And so I'm kind of worried too now. And so we get a really quick late breakfast of Mishan and then take all the tea to the pressing facility. And the pressing facility here is really exceptional. This is by far the best, highest quality, cleanest tea cake pressing facility I've ever seen. It's on the 5th floor of a really nice modern building with, a nice freight elevator. You go in. They give you little booties to put over your feet. Everyone's wearing hairnets, masks, and gloves. And it's really, shiny steel, about as spotless as it can be. I see people already wrapping a bunch of cakes, and they're talking. Lange is trying to push them to get my tea cake pressed first because they say, like, oh, we already have a backlog. I don't know if we can press it today. She's like, we only have 5 kilograms. And just press the actual cakes today, do the Dragon Balls later, and they eventually agree, which I'm just like very, very grateful for because I'm there wanting to film. I end up doing a live stream for the Zhibo is Chinese, a live stream for Instagram and kind of show the whole process. I'm pretty sure the live stream is still up, saved to the lives and the videos in Instagram, if you're curious about seeing what that factory looks like. Now, I realize I'm already towards the end of my time limit on this episode, but I might as well just continue on and go over. So let me tell you how the tea cake is pressed. There are a few different stages. I have a box of what we call mao cha. Mao cha is tea that is drinkable. It's processed, it's finished, it's totally dry. Sometimes it has the huang pian in it, the older leaves. Sometimes it doesn't. This Xigui has fewer huang pian because Atsai, the brother Li, does that shaking where he gets some of the old debris, the particles, the broken leaves, the old bits out of the tea before he actually presses it or before he processes it, finishes it as the mao cha. So I bring this box of tea to the people pressing it, and there are 2 guys. One of them takes it to this big stainless steel table with 3 walls on it so that the tea doesn't fall off, and he dumps it all out. And then from there he starts separating it out, looking at the leaves themselves. What he's doing is a little bit of spot checking, just making sure there isn't any alien debris in it, no twigs, no stones, no other leaves. And then what he's also doing is he's weighing it. He's putting it into these small tins which is exactly on a scale and measuring 200 grams. And then he takes that tin of 200 grams and sets it aside. Now, this tin has a perforated bottom. It's got a big cylinder with a perforated bottom. And then this gets placed on a steaming vent. And that steaming vent is just hot steam air coming up through the bottom of the table, goes through the perforated bottom, hits the dry leaves, and the dry leaves just slowly start melting down, getting soft again. And then this soft tea is put into the pressing device. This is a very modern facility, and the pressing device is incredibly automated. And so he puts it onto this little conveyor belt. The conveyor belt goes under the machine. The machine has a hydraulic press that comes down, presses the tea. And so I should mention, before it was pressed, he slipped in that nefe. So that's the last thing he does before he puts it under the machine, and it presses down. And so the nefe gets pressed in right at the top of the tea. Usually there are a few leaves over it to keep it stuck in there. But then the tea comes out, and he hands it to me. And it's still warm from being steamed, but it's tightly compressed. He really takes it out of the wrapper, the muslin wrapper, and shows it to me. I look at it, and what he's doing, because I told Lanjie that I wanted it pressed a little loosely. This is one thing, the feedback we got from the Lao cakes is they were pressed too tight. And so I asked her to press it a little loosely. And so he shows it to me, and I'm like, okay, this is a very good loose press. And so he says, okay. He puts it back in the muslin cloth, wraps it up, and then puts it on the drying and shaping rack. And then the rest of the tea starts getting processed. And again, it's so streamlined, so clean. I'm very, very satisfied. And what they do is they put it all on the racks, and then eventually, after a few minutes after being steamed, they'll take it out of their muslin wrapping and then leave it on those racks to dry. This facility even has a hot air room, which helps dry it out more completely, more evenly than just leaving it to air dry. However, it still takes several days. You can't wrap the tea immediately after, because this is what we found out with the Laotian tea that was pressed in the tubes. They pressed it, probably didn't wait long enough, and then put it in plastic, and that just, all the moisture got stuck in there. So I was able to see the entire pressing of these cakes right before the festival, right before this huge break, this huge lull. Oh, another thing is the Dragon Balls. I didn't get to see them making the Dragon Balls. They did that afterwards. But they're all handmade, which is very easy to tell if you're looking at the Linsong Dragon Balls versus the Sichuanbana Dragon Balls that I pressed. The stuff from the Huaju Liangsa, that was a machine pressing for the Dragon Balls. The Linsong stuff is all hand pressed, and you can kind of see it because it's less tight. So what they do is they have that steamed tea, they weigh out 7 grams, they put it in a very small muslin cloth, and then twist it up and literally roll it in their hands. And they keep it tied in the muslin cloth until it dries. And so I saw them unpacking these that they had rolled, but my tea, it was too late in the day that it takes too long to do the Dragon Balls. They had to do it at another time, but I got to see them unwrapping it. And so the dry tea in the muslin cloth, they just pop it open, and you can actually see a small little tail where, if you're imagining, you put the tea into a muslin cloth and then you tie it together and roll it around. There's a point where you tie the muslin cloth together, and that creates a small little point in the tea ball. And so if you look at a hand-rolled tea ball, you'll see this small little tail, the tiniest little tail. Then you'll also see that it's more loosely compressed. It brews up faster, which that alone is reason for me to prefer the hand-rolled tea balls. A lot of times, if you haven't picked this up, I have a long-standing question of, is handmade better than machine-made? And a lot of times I would say, no, it's not. A lot of times I would say the machine-made stuff can give you a lot higher quality, a lot higher accuracy, a lot better consistency than the handmade stuff, unless the handmade stuff is very high quality. And usually if it's very high quality, a very high level of expert maker, it's going to cost a whole lot of money. And then usually the average cost for machine-made things are cheaper. I'm talking about tea, I'm talking about teaware. And so really just figuring out that balance. And so for me, this is one of the very clear exceptions where the hand-rolled Dragon Balls are superior, but they're also superior because they're not as uniform. They're not as tight. They're not as crisp. They'll unfurl easier. Anyways, that's a whole nother topic that, I will back up because I'm sure it raised quite a few eyebrows, but it's certainly a complicated truth, and one that I'm seeing more and more the more I'm learning about tea, its production, and about teaware, and everything kind of has its own place in that production method. Anyways, that is a speed run of what it was like being in a tea pressing factory, and a really nice one actually. It was still very loud. If you look at the Instagram live, you'll see it gets pretty loud when they're steaming the tea, when they're pressing the tea and everything, but compared to all of my other tea cake pressing experiences, that was a walk in the park. That was so nice that like Lanjie and I went to the park later. Right after that, it was about 12:30, and we're just like feeding geese, and I'm just like, this is really nice. It was like the easiest thing I'd ever done. And so, unfortunately, though, what we're about to see is a lull in my tea trip, where all of a sudden I've been so busy in Linsong, visiting all these mountains, pressing the tea cakes, figuring out these problems, solving these issues, and then all of a sudden I have 3 or 4 days of I don't know what to do. And so this is, and for the next episode, I'll talk about the time after this, the water splashing festival, those kinds of activities, the stories behind it, what it means. I'll talk about hiking Dashui Shan. If you know about Pu'er tea, about Linsong Pu'er tea, you've probably heard of Dashui Shan. Dashui Shan is the big snow mountain, and it is an ancient place of tea. I climbed that with Gao Lei, who's a Bingdao farmer. I'll tell you all about Gao Lei because he is a character. And then the Bingdao, of course, the very interesting point. This is all in the Mengku area, which is a little bit on the west side of Linsong. And so the next days I spent some time with the Water Splashing Festival. I hike the Dashui Shan. I see ancient 1,000-year-old trees, 3,000-year-old trees. Really amazing things. And then eventually I press some more tea cakes up in Linsong, and then I make my way down to Menghai. And so that'll be the topic for next episode. Water Splashing Festival, a little bit of Gao Lei, and then down to Menghai. Maybe I can even get into the Huazhu Liangsi region, because in this episode I didn't really stick on target too much. I had a lot of tangents, a lot of stories, and so I hope you'll forgive me for it. But what I really want to do is show you what it was like to press these teas, to give you an example of why it was so amazing, why I appreciate my time in Linsong so much, and why I'm so excited to go back and press more tea cakes. So again, I'll probably be back there in a few months' time, hanging out with Lanjie. I'll see the brothers Li again, I'm sure. Hopefully I can visit Kuashan this time, because I'll talk about in the next episode, I missed out on that trip because I was hiking Dashui Shan at the same time Lanjie went to Kuashan. And there's this dilemma of only being one person, only having to choose one path. And anyways, get more on that later. This is Derek from One Over Tea, wishing you a very happy, healthy, lucky, rich Year of the Dragon. It's my year, and so I'm a little cautious because the way it goes in Chinese astrology, when it is your year, it's kind of a dangerous year. So right now I'm wearing my red underwear and other clothes, of course. This is not that kind of podcast. But that protects me from evil. Red is seen as a very powerful color. I remember when I first moved to China, they had red lights in the hospitals, which terrified me, but it's a good thing. It keeps the demons away. I have a red band on my wrist. I'm ready for this year. It's going to be a year of trial, a year of tests, and so wish me the best of luck, everyone. So, from a really nice, warm Yangzhou Jiangsu, wishing you guys a very happy new year, and until next time, brew happy.